Happy Friday, folks. Senior editor Mackenzie Taylor here on the Texan's weekly Roundup podcast. This week, the team discusses early voting beginning in the wake of the new ballot fraud law, Texas voter registration and initial early voting turnout, the top 10 midterm races to watch in Texas from governor to county judge, Governor Abbott's office seeming open to legalizing casinos, the challenges Comptroller Glenn Hager faces if he wins his third and final term, border agents encountering 1.5 million illegal aliens in fiscal year 2022, the Donald Trump rally in Robstown last weekend and allusions to a 2024 run for the White House, Paxton warning that the federal government could overpower Texas if the state declared a border invasion, a state judge allowing the Ector County Water District election to proceed, board members of the Ector County Utilities District questioning if the board president received a pardon for drug dealing, a district judge halting Amarillo's attempt to take out $260 million in non-voter approved debt, Democrat Mike Collier's lawyer demanding stations cancel an ad from Republican Dan Patrick, and the 3 write-in candidates running for a district court seat in Dallas County. As always, if you have questions for our team, DM us on Twitter or email us at editor@thetexan.news. We'd love to answer your questions on a future podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Well, hello everyone. This is Mackenzie here with Brad, Hayden, Rob, and Matthew. We're off to a rough start, but we won't.
We are. This has been a bumpy on-ramp into the pod.
Brad's already mad at me.
My favorite thing about the signature Brad and Mackenzie arguments is they each always make this eye contact with me like I'm the referee and I'm supposed to make a ruling. And I just sit here like, hey guys.
We trust you. We trust you. And Hayden used to take my side more, and now he has kind of, I don't know, found a way to make more parties pleased. And that is fair.
I don't know how I feel about that
but it's
assessment.
True. But I'm a little sad, Hayden.
You are?
I'm a little lonely over here.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry.
This is like a therapy session. Okay.
I wasn't aware of this increasing loneliness of yours in the office.
Have you noticed that Brad hasn't said a single word?
He hasn't. He's
I think he's actually
stewing a little bit.
I think he actually is stewing.
Can we just get on with the podcast?
Oh my gosh.
You continuing to browbeat over this makes me more angry.
I don't know what to do. I want everyone to be happy. Okay, speaking of happiness, Hayden, early voting has started in Texas. Folks are excited to cast their ballots. What are the dates for early voting, and how can people find out where to vote?
Hold on, let me get my stopwatch so I don't talk too long. Yes, early voting is underway here in the state of Texas. Lone Star State voters started going to the polls on Monday, and early voting hours can vary by county according to state law. So make sure you go to votetexas.org and check out where you can find out to vote. You can also see different polling locations, and you can check to see whether you're registered. The deadline to register to vote was earlier this month, so if you are not registered, unfortunately, that particular ship has sailed. But if you are registered, you can go see where you can vote, and if you are able to vote after work, depending on what the early voting hours are for your county. You can also go to thetexan.news for more information about candidates and their fundraising halls. The War Room on the Texan is a great resource, and the Texas Secretary of State's website, sos.state.tx.us, also provides a listing of the candidates. So if you're wondering who is running in your precinct, your county, or at the statewide level, you can always go to any of those websites, especially the Texan.news, and find more information about your candidates.
Good plug, Hayden. So this is the first general election since that infamous Election Integrity Act of 2021 was passed by the legislature, GOP-backed, caused Democrats to flee in hopes they would kill the bill. It passed regardless. What are some of the highlights of that new law?
The new law restricts early voting to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., although it did raise the minimum number of hours for early voting. Some counties, particularly Harris County, were using 24-hour voting and other creative uses of state law for more accommodation of early voting. And this ballot fraud, I almost said ballot frog like the other week. This ballot fraud prevention law creates this window of time for early voting, even though the window of time as far as dates go is the same statewide. Early voting began on Monday and it ends on Friday, November 4th, with Election Day on November 8th. The early voting hours are restricted from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And there are additional verification requirements for mail ballot applications, such as using a driver license or social security number. Those records must match state records, and there's increased protections for poll watchers. It criminalizes turning away a poll watcher if they are legitimately at a polling place, and people cannot send unsolicited applications for a ballot by mail. That includes government officials. It is a criminal act to do that as well. The law also included randomized audits by the Texas Secretary of State's office, and that is just a handful of some of the reforms that were implemented in this law. And Mackenzie, as you mentioned, this was the result of several special sessions that were stymied as a result of a Democratic walkout and quorum bust, and a quorum was not restored until mid-August, and Governor Abbott signed this bill into law in September of last year. So this is the first general election where Texas voter registrars, Texas election workers are functioning under this new framework in the Election Integrity Protection Act of 2021.
Very good, Hayden. Thank you. Brad, we're going to keep on the subject of early voting. It's gotten off to somewhat of a slow start this year, but the number of registered voters climbed once again. What did you see when looking at the data?
So Texas has slightly more than 716,000 new registered voters this year compared with the 2020 election. About a 12% increase from the 2018 midterm. In total, there are 17.7 million registered voters in Texas. And as the state's population continues to grow, that number is going to keep going up. Now, that's different than the number of people that actually participate in these elections. But the counties with the largest percentage increase in registered voters that I saw was Comal, Kaufman, Parker, Rockwall, and Williamson counties. Each of those are either really GOP heavy or, in Williamson's case, GOP leaning counties. So that is a good trend for Republicans, I guess. But those are also exurbs of metropolitan areas. So that part of why you probably see more registered voters is people moving out of the Republicans moving out of the metropolitan counties and into these exurbs. And that's happening all across the state, all across the country.
What's the difference between an exurb and a suburb? Apologies for that stupid question.
The way I've always understood it is an exurb is a county away.
A little bit
further away. And a suburb
away.
is like a neighborhood that's not downtown of a city. Like it's still in.
Interesting.
In the, let's say, Dallas. It's still in Dallas, but Dallas County. But it's, but then like Collin County would be an exurb.
Interesting.
Yeah, until Collin County becomes a metropolitan area, which McKinney's growing a lot, so that's possible. But you said keep these pithy, so I'll try not to let you drag me off track again.
Oh my gosh.
40% of these new additions since last midterm are located in the state's 6 largest counties. But despite all that, early voting is off to a sluggish start with 500,000 people on the first day. Probably in part due to rainstorms on Monday. Turnout started off slower than in 2018. On Tuesday, it remained behind the pace set 4 years ago. Roughly now we have, not including Wednesday, because we don't have those numbers yet, we have 1.1 million people having cast ballots. So you can see some more data in the article that we posted on this.
Well, thank you, Bradley. You also previewed the top 10 races to watch this election in a piece published earlier this week. Give us a little rundown.
Yeah, so obviously the governor's race is something to watch. That is the top one. The attorney general's race is really notable. And there's a bunch of others, some of which have caught national attention. Others have not at all caught really any attention. If you want to read brief summaries of each of those and why I selected those as the top races to watch. Obviously, there's going to be more to watch, but had to limit it to 10 for this, and really it's 11. But I would recommend you go check that out. It highlights some things that not many people are watching.
Certainly. Definitely worth a read at the Texan.news. Thank you, Bradley. Hayden, Governor Abbott recently signaled a change of heart on gambling. What exactly did he have to say?
His press secretary, Renee Ease, gave a statement to the Houston Chronicle that indicated he might be, let's just say he hasn't opened the door to casino gambling, but his hand is certainly on the doorknob, because the statement that his office put out is different than what he has said in the past. They said, quote, "We don't want slot machines at every corner store. We don't want Texans to be losing money that they need for everyday expenses. And we don't want any type of crime that could be associated with gaming. But if there is a way to create a very professional entertainment option for Texans, Governor Abbott would take a look at it," end quote. So that's the statement that he made in response to questions about whether he would be open to expanding gambling laws in the next legislative session.
How harsh is the political landscape for casino gambling proponents?
As I mentioned in the past, Abbott has not been friendly to this particular project. He has said years ago that he wholeheartedly supported the state's restrictions on gambling. But this election cycle, Dr. Miriam Adelson, a casino gaming mogul who's the widow of Sheldon Adelson, seems to be carrying on her husband's legacy of expanding their casino gaming empire. She cut a check for $1 million to his campaign last month, and that was a personal donation from Adelson to Abbott. And then a PAC funded by Miriam Adelson, Texas Sands, has also contributed $1.5 million to Texas lawmakers and Governor Abbott's reelection bid. So they are seeking to put their ducks in a row for the upcoming legislative session. If it is to pass, it would require a constitutional amendment. And bear in mind, Las Vegas Sands and other outfits that are supporting this are not seeking a carte blanche legalization of casinos statewide. They're wanting a very tailored version of decriminalizing this and legalizing it so that they can have destination resorts, as they call them, that includes casino gambling. But the bids or in the minimum amount of investment required for these constitutional amendments would be so high, there wouldn't be anything like a mom and pop casino popping up everywhere. So that goal, that legislative outcome, seems to be consistent with the statement that Abbott put out. In other words, this is not going to be an opportunity that just anybody could start a casino, but something that these big guys and these big out-of-state players could come in and possibly fund this. And the only entertainment venues that currently exist that are similar to casinos are operated by federally recognized Native American tribes, and the state of Texas has even fought those. So the political landscape is harsh for these efforts, but it might be a little bit friendlier to Las Vegas Sands that has the money to gamble on this, so to speak.
I'm sure the Adelson crew was excited to see those comments from the governor and his team. Thank you, Hayden. Brad, Glenn Hager is seeking re-election for what he said will be his final term as Texas comptroller. Give us a preview of his race against Democrat Janet Detting.
So he is running for, like you said, his final term, third and final. He said that last month, should he win. And he's got a pretty big advantage. He's got, first of all, he's been on the ballot multiple times statewide. He's also in a Republican-leaning state. And finally, he has $8 million cash on hand as of the latest report. And that's 170 times more than what his opponent had. So it's quite a big advantage. It's expected. It would be a total shock if he were to lose. But the comptroller is not really something that's talked about that much. It is a very obscure position, especially in the name, but really it's the CFO of the state. And so he has a lot of responsibilities. The chief ones are budget forecasting and collecting and remitting sales tax payments. And so a large part of his job is to monitor the fiscal economic health of the state. And that itself, Texas economy, along with the national economy, is kind of at the whims of the global economy. And so it's an interesting parallel for the thing that he watches most closely in his day job, or the dynamic being left to the whims of something that is out of his control. His reelection is also kind of out of his control largely. Unless he has some massive scandal, which there's no sign of that anywhere. And so really it's the top of the ticket that drives votes in down ballot races, and that goes for everyone. So Governor Abbott and Beto O'Rourke are setting the tone for this race, and as well as all the others, along with what's happening at the national level with the inflation that we see, the Biden administration's posture, especially regarding the oil and gas industry, which Hager has gotten an increased role in one subsection of that with the SB 13 list, the boycott, removing pension funds from these banks that have been determined to be boycotting the oil and gas industry. So it's an interesting race, even though it's not all that notable. And so you can read more about that in the article there. You can read some of Janet Dudding's priorities as far as where she resides on the political spectrum. She's pretty liberal. She has a lot of different opinions than Hager on how she would run things. But there's some other things in there that I think you might find interesting. So check it out.
Certainly. Hayden, fiscal year 2022 was a record year for illegal immigration. Give us an outline of some of the statistics that stood out in the last operational update.
There were, in fiscal year 2022, 2.38 million encounters along the southern border with illegal immigrants, and 2.2 million of those were arrests by border agents between ports of entry. 1.5 million of those encounters occurred in Texas sectors, including 1.4 million arrests by border guards. Just to place that number in perspective, the population of Dallas is less than the number of people who were arrested for crossing into Texas sectors illegally, and the population of Houston is less than the number that were arrested overall in the entire southern border. And these are people who might have crossed the border illegally before in the previous 12 months and have another encounter with border agents. For September of this year, the last month in the fiscal year, there was a 16% increase in border arrests in Texas sectors from August to September. In September of 2021, there were just under 128,000 border arrests, and in September of this year, there were just over 136,000. So not only was there an increase from August to September, it's also an increase from September of last year as well. And the CBP is indicating that still about a third of the encounters along the southern border in September ended with an expulsion under Title 42, which is really becoming a legal remnant of the COVID-19 pandemic. And 11% of the family units encountered were expelled under 42, and 42% of the single adults were expelled pursuant to the order. So it is still very much a policy that affects single adults more than it affects family units, and unaccompanied minors are not affected by the policy.
What have Democrats and the Biden administration had to say lately about illegal immigration?
Commissioner Magnus continues to emphasize that he believes Title 42 is the reason that there are so many repeat encounters, and the number of unique individuals who are crossing the border illegally is much lower than the number of encounters, is Title 42 allows the government to rapidly expel people without using some of the processes that are under the regular immigration laws. So Commissioner Magnus continues to emphasize that. Secretary Mayorkas recently said that Republicans are the ones who are fueling the idea that the border is open with political rhetoric and criticizing Democrats for quote unquote open border policies. And he also emphasized a new policy that is supposed to crack down on Venezuelan illegal immigration, which is contributing to the current surge. He said that is going to help, but he referenced a period of time that is outside of fiscal year 2022, which was the focus of the most recent operational update. And I forgot to mention this, there were reportedly 599,000 known gotaways during the last fiscal year, but that doesn't include people who evaded both arrest and detection. So Democrats are still pointing at Republicans, saying that it's the open border rhetoric and that they're seeking to create a more humane immigration system, and still trying to tear down some of those Trump policies that have outlasted his administration due to federal court rulings.
There you go. Well, Hayden, thank you so much for covering that for us. And gosh, it would not be the Texans podcast without a couple of border stories. So thank you so much. Rob, we're going to come to you. This week you had the pleasure, the experience, whatever you might qualify it as, of attending a campaign rally that former President Donald Trump held in Conroe, his second rally in Texas this year. What did the speakers talk about?
So I'll just make a quick correction there. It was in Robstown in South Texas. Conroe was his first one in January.
Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
It is perfectly fine. So it was an interesting experience. I had never been to a Trump rally before, but working here gave me the opportunity to do that.
And even Rob in Robstown, it's just perfect.
That's why y'all sent me there. Yeah, that's why y'all sent me there. Brandon Judd, the president of the National Border Council, was speaking with Right Side News on, they had a big stage set up where people were filing into the actual event proper. He was talking about how, Democrats are promoting illegal immigration, doing it on purpose, possibly to change national demographics in order to get more Democrats elected. Congressman Pat Fallon said that we are going to make Grover Cleveland, a.k.a. Donald Trump, president of the United States again. Grover Cleveland is the only president until now to have served 2 non-consecutive terms in the late 19th century. So former ICE director Tom Homan said Trump should return to fix this. Congressional candidate Wesley Hunt said Trump was the 45th president and has the opportunity to be the 47th president. There's sort of a pattern emerging here, which is a lot of congressional people in the federal government are really encouraging Trump to get out and run again in 2024. Congressman Ronnie Jackson was also talked about the border. The border was a big issue. Robstown, right next to Corpus. It's in South Texas. It's very close to the border. The border was a huge issue that people were talking about. Congressman Ronnie Jackson also agreed that Trump should return in 2024. And Congressman Michael Cloud and Attorney General Ken Paxton both suggested that the current President Joe Biden is either aiding or abetting cartels or is even partnering with them in order to somehow promote illegal immigration. Another big issue that they talked about with respect to the border was fentanyl, with claims being thrown around that fentanyl was the explosion of fentanyl trafficking in the United States was due to illegal immigration, and that cartels are sending people to the border in order to overwhelm border security so that they can sneak more cartel through the southern border.
When Trump took the stage, what did he talk about?
So he talked about a lot of different things. When Trump gets on that, he'll sort of go onto a lot of different topics. So he also blamed Biden for the border situation. He said that it was much better under himself, which I think is a very Trumpian thing to say. It was much better under him and it's much worse under Biden. He claimed that illegal immigrants from, I think it was over 160 countries are storming the U.S. border. He talked about also with respect to fentanyl, he praised China's quick trials and death sentences for drug dealers. He said he had a conversation with Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping told him that that's how they take care of things. And Trump was like, oh, well, there you go. He also said, referring to the Dobbs draft majority opinion leak in May, which I remember we were reporting on about the time that I joined the Texan in May, which is very interesting. He was saying that the federal government should find those who have the Politico, which is the place where it was first leaked, and get those people and say, hey, you have to tell us as national security issue who this leaker was, or else we'll threaten you with prison time, which made the rounds on Twitter. It was a bit of a controversial statement. Trump was also really trying to energize Republicans in South Texas. A lot of Republicans are hoping to flip South Texas seats this midterm cycle. And in order to retake the Congress, he praised Mayra Flores, who is the current Congresswoman, and congressional candidates Cassie Garcia and Monica de la Cruz. He also promoted Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and Attorney General Paxton over Beto O'Rourke, Mike Collier, and Rochelle Garza. As for other things that he talked about, he invited Brandon Judd and Tom Homan back up to the stage during his speeches. Judd said to Trump that he praised him for, quote, what he did, and said that he, quote, hoped he would do it again. And when Homan said, if Trump comes back, I come back. Trump responded, "That's a good deal." Very Trumpian thing to say. So Trump said also in possibly his most direct statement on the issue, Trump said, he said he did a good job as president and he will probably have to do it again.
Interesting.
So we don't have a direct, statement that he is running again. But if you asked me if I had to put money down, I would say that he's probably going to run again. So that'll be interesting to see.
Hayden and Brad, would you put money down on Trump running again?
Hey now, no gambling, y'all. It's still illegal in Texas.
Not till we get the new Trump casinos in Texas.
Trump casinos. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? Yeah, I'm kind of 50-50 on it.
That is the strongest
curious.
I think he has said, or the closest he's gotten to making an announcement that he's running.
And I wonder if the people there were sort of like riling him up. Like, I wonder if people, if the congressmen who were there are trying to get him to admit it or something, or if they know something we don't, or if they're just really hoping he runs again.
I mean, the obvious indicator is that he's having rallies, and then he says he's probably going to run, but he's still just kind of screwing with everybody at this point. It seems like he's not announcing yet, but he's saying all of these things that point to him running, and it's probably giving DeSantis a little bit of a heart attack.
Logically, it's smart to get past the midterm elections and not steal the show there.
Yeah, I think Matt is right here, is that I think that as soon as the midterms are over, if the Republicans have retaken the Congress, if they don't, I think he might delay it. But if they do, I think that, maybe November 9th, maybe that week, we'll have possibly our earliest presidential announcement run ever. I don't know.
Who knows? And I will say, Trump is 76 years old. Sometimes I forget how old he is, which is also something that I think is certainly worth considering. I believe President Biden is 79, if I'm not mistaken. So interesting stuff. Well, Rob, thanks for covering that for us, and certainly worth checking out his piece at the Texan.news to read all about the day and get the full rundown. Hayden, we are coming back to you. More border news. Shocker, shocker. Some have called for Texas to declare an invasion along the southern border. We had individual counties in Texas doing that often. What did Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, have to say about this?
No one has been more confrontational with Biden over border security and illegal immigration than Ken Paxton. As Texas Attorney General, he has sued Biden about 9 times. There are a couple other suits that involve border security and illegal immigration. So a total of 11 times, Paxton's office has initiated litigation against the Biden administration over this issue. But he was hesitant to accept the idea that Texas could declare an invasion and start deporting illegal immigrants itself, because that falls under the purview of federal law and federal jurisdiction according to every court case on the issue. He stated, quote, "The idea is we would send the National Guard down. The problem is the National Guard could easily be taken over by Biden, who'd say, 'No, I'm in charge now.' So then what do? Send state police down to the border and tell them to stop Border Patrol from taking people in? Are we supposed to start shooting the Border Patrol?" Unquote. Paxton is, of course, saying that this could result in a confrontation between the state and the federal government that the feds would inevitably win.
Is Ken Paxton in danger of losing to his Democratic rival?
I thought it was a little bizarre that Paxton would weigh in on something like this when he's ahead, because Paxton, in a recent poll of likely voters, received the support of 51% of respondents, while his opponent, Democrat Rochelle Garza, came in with 37%. And then there's also a libertarian on the ballot. But Garza has been primarily running on abortion, which is a better issue for Democrats than border security. But voters, according to the recent polling, seem to be focused more on border security and illegal immigration. There was a poll by the University of Texas at Austin, I believe. I'm sorry, it may have been another firm that did this poll, but voters prioritized illegal immigration and border security out of a list of 11, and they seem to be more focused on that. Paxton has the advantage, obviously, on that issue because he is known more as the pro-border security, strict enforcement candidate. So I thought it was interesting that he would come out and temper his stance on this a little bit by saying, hold your horses, we can't exactly declare an invasion. Although about 33 counties have reportedly passed resolutions or documents declaring an invasion of illegal immigration on the southern border. And Abbott invoked portions of the Constitution that are to that effect, but obviously stopped short of ordering state authorities to enforce federal law. So Ken Paxton is ahead in the race, but he's still weighing in on this and reining in a little bit his staunch support for aggressive border enforcement.
Wonderful, Hayden. Well, thank you for your coverage on those issues. Matthew, we're finally coming to you. Does it feel, being number 10 on the podcast docket, number 10 of the stories that we're telling today, does it feel like you're low on the totem pole?
Well, not really. I know it's taken a while to get here, but it's because we have so many interesting stories that we're covering at the Texan. So I've enjoyed listening to everybody's explain their recent coverage going on around the state.
Well, that's very gentlemanly of you. And this is still very interesting stuff. Speaking of these interesting stories, a lot is going on with the Ector County Utility District, with your reporting on a lawsuit by 2 board members who say that the district called an election at the wrong time for the wrong seats. Very spicy. A district judge initially blocked the election, but in our latest report, allowed the November election and the lawsuit to proceed. Give us the details about this newest scandal that has surfaced.
It has been quite a saga, Mackenzie. So we've originally been reporting on this lawsuit where 2 directors on the Ector County Utility District, Troy Walker and Will Kapoff, filed a lawsuit saying that state law requires municipal utility districts like ECUD to hold their elections in May as opposed to November. And in addition to that, they've got to looking at the order of elections and who should be up now versus who is in the middle of their 4-year terms. And they figured out not only are we not supposed to be on the November ballots, but other board members are supposed to be up and should have been up back in May when the election should have been held. So they filed a lawsuit in state district court in Ector County, and the district judge, John Schroeder, originally issued a temporary restraining order halting the election. Now, we were reported on that, and they held a injunction hearing for a permanent injunction. And it was at that point that Judge Schroeder denied the injunction and allowed the election continue, saying that it wasn't based on the grounds or the merits of the plaintiff's argument, but it was because they failed to demonstrate that injunctive relief was that their needs met the threshold, the dire nature threshold required for a preliminary injunction. And he reminded everybody multiple times that his denial of the injunction had no bearing or statement about the merits of the case. So the trial is proceeding and could ultimately cause the election results to be canceled or voided after the election is held. But at the same time, he is allowing the election to proceed. Now, during the course of all this, Kapoff and Walker have been looking at all sorts of different aspects of the districts. And one of the things that came up was the fact that board president Tommy Irvin, who is kind of at the center of all of these issues surrounding the district, it turns out he has 4 felony convictions from the late 1970s for dealing cocaine and methamphetamine. And since board of director positions on a municipal utility district or publicly elected offices, convicted felons are prohibited under state law from holding public offices. Now, Irvin says he has a pardon from a prior Texas governor for those felony convictions, but after board members Kapoff and Walker have demanded evidence of that pardon, he's failed to deliver. Now, we did some investigating at the Texan and reached out to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, and they issued a letter telling us they have no record of Mr. Irvin receiving executive clemency, but reminded us that the ultimate record holder for executive clemency documents is the Texas Secretary of State. So we reached out to them as well, and we're waiting for a response from that final custodian of official executive record matters. In the meantime, Kapoff and Walker continue to demand evidence on that end and say that if a pardon cannot be found, they are exploring a potential suit to remove Irvin from office that would be separate from this currently suit that is ongoing. So altogether, so many different interesting aspects coming about on this race. There's also another little side scandal that started breaking out yesterday that we haven't reported on yet. But apparently, in addition to the two board of directors on the ballot, there is a measure on the ballot to annex some properties into the municipal water district's jurisdiction, and that the voters in this proposed annex area are not being allowed to vote on their annexation. Now, this is all stuff that's just kind of come about, but it's one of the many different scandals in this saga that are all unique but related in some fashion.
Wow. Well, Matt, thank you for digging into all of that and continuing to watch. It's an unfolding story that you've been updating our readers on since the start. So we appreciate your coverage of it. And we'll keep an eye on what exactly is going on over there in Ector County. We love some West Texas coverage at the Texan. Bradley, one lawsuit you've been following a lot concerns the city of Amarillo. This week, there was a big update. What happened?
So 4 months after the city approved an unconventional debt maneuver using tax anticipation notes amounting to $260 million, which was issued 2 years after voters rejected their $275 million bond in 2020. 4 years after that, or 4 months after that, a judge has struck this down and halted the issuance of the debt. So the maneuver they were going to do is issue these TANs, which are essentially like a bridge loan to get you from point A to point B between revenues coming in. They were then going to refinance that debt with certificates of obligation, a mechanism they couldn't use for this project right now because it is within the 3-year moratorium after a bond fails at the ballot box. So they couldn't just issue COs for the $275 million, but because they managed to find this bridge loan essentially for the project, they would then be able to refinance the debt as a certificate of obligation, which also doesn't need voter approval. So businessman Alex Fairley sued, alleging the maneuver was improper and that it violated numerous public notice requirements. This week, the judge ruled in his favor on virtually everything. Judge Bill Souter ordered the suspension of the debt issuance and ordered the city to pay Fairley for much of the $500,000 he spent in legal fees.
So what's next on this?
Eyes on this move to the legislature. So the city may decide to appeal, unsure of what they're going to do. When I asked them for comment, they said they're considering it, but they haven't made a decision. But the main fight will be in the state capitol to close this loophole. When we first started talking about this, it was after a hearing, a House committee hearing where they were fairly testified, and a lot of multiple legislators kind of railed against what happened out in Amarillo on this. And so there's going to be a lot of push in the legislature to close this loophole. And it is a loophole that exists. If the city had crossed its T's and dotted its I's, it would have been fine to push this through because it is available to them. Fairley acknowledges that. He acknowledged it in his filing. But he told me what's next is seeing if the legislature can block this opening. If we don't get that, even with this win, that I wouldn't feel like we've succeeded. The last couple of sessions, we've seen a lot of reform on local government debt issuance and their ability to do that. There's going to be more because of this and any other loopholes they manage to find, that these local governments manage to find and try and take action on.
There you go. Well, Bradley, thank you for your coverage. Another spicy local story. I love those. They're probably my favorite that we publish at the Texan. Hayden, this is also really spicy. I think I just like most of the things we publish. Y'all are just very good at your jobs, and I'm a fan.
Aw.
An attorney for Mike Collier sent a cease and desist letter to Texas broadcasters asking them to take down a Dan Patrick ad. What were the contents of that controversial ad?
Well, I would love to talk about this, but I can't because I got a cease and desist letter from Collier telling me not to talk about it. I'm kidding. The ad in question was a controversial, according to Collier, advertisement saying that Collier, who is the Democratic contender to replace Lieutenant Governor Patrick, supports open borders and banning new charter schools and supports the progressive Green New Deal, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, political advertising often has hyperbole and exaggerations, which is entirely legal. They are allowed to appeal to fear. They are allowed to appeal to theatrics and dramatic things. And both political parties, people of all political stripes, do that. However, the attorney for Collier claims that this ad, because it contains no citations and according to Collier's team, contains things that are verifiably false, that it violates the standards that are set forth in the Federal Communications Commission's guidelines for political advertising or advertising in general. And broadcasters, according to the FCC, have a responsibility to police that type of thing. So his attorneys sent a letter to broadcasters across the state of Texas requesting/demanding that they take down this advertisement or in a roundabout way, censor it so that it no longer plays on the air prior to the election.
There you go. Does Collier truly have a legal case to take down the ad?
What I noticed about this letter, and it sounded pretty interesting, was how courtly it was, and it was almost overly polite for a cease and desist letter. There was no, we'll see you in court, or this is an egregious violation. The attorney seems to be delicately asking these broadcasters to take down this ad. I think it would likely be a stretch. WFAA and their reporting said that they got an ad, they were one of the recipients of the cease and desist letter, but because the ad in question has Patrick's face on it, it has a picture of him at the end of the ad and has that little disclaimer that says, this political ad was paid for by friends of Dan Patrick, that because it was sponsored by him and because it contains his face, that it is legitimate and they wouldn't have any standing to censor it. Again, it doesn't have the footnotes or the citations that a lot of ads do, but it would probably be a long shot for broadcasters to suddenly start taking down an ad because of one letter that they got from an attorney who doesn't seem like he has a lot of legal backing for this request.
There you go. Well, spicy regardless. Hayden, thank you so much for covering that for us. Matthew, we are coming back to you. Matt, are you there? No, he's also gone. I don't see him. And he's off. I think his internet just went down. Should we make this a segment on the podcast? Folks, we have lost Matt Stringer. I'm calling him to see if I can find.
Hello?
Matt, we lost you. Where did you go?
Well, it was so weird. I was literally like, nothing on my end indicated that I wasn't there and live. And y'all were like, where'd he go? And I'm like, I'm right here. And y'all were like, he disappeared. And I'm like, I see myself and I can hear myself.
I can't see you or hear you. And it says that you're offline.
Let's see here.
Folks, we're going to troubleshoot this and we will be right back.
What was that about a herd of turkeys?
I was late to joining because a herd of turkeys was crossing the road. And it was a whole bunch of them, and they just kept this continuous stream of turkeys. So I just had to sit there until they were like, and they weren't letting me through, so.
I just like the phrase, a continuous stream of turkeys.
It's a true story.
Oh, brother. Well, hey, listeners, if you enjoy our podcast each week, subscribe to The Texan. New subscribers will now get a free Fake News Stops Here mug, by far our most popular merch item of all time. For more details, visit thetexan.news/subscribe or click the URL in the description of this podcast. Well, folks, we have made it back after some major technical wow, I can't even say technical difficulties. That's how difficult these technical difficulties were. But Matt, you're back with us. Thank you for bearing with us. This won't mean anything to our listeners, but it does to us. So we're so glad you were able to join our podcast once again. Let's finish with the last story of the pod. 3 write-in candidates are the only candidates running for a Dallas County-based state district court seat. Tell us about this very unusual race and some of the interesting details surrounding how this came to be.
That's right, Mackenzie. Very interesting race. State district courts are, of course, the highest trial court in our state judicial system. And in Dallas, the 301st State District Court has countywide jurisdiction and is generally known as a family court. Now, an interesting thing, incumbent Judge Mary Brown back in January of this year was disqualified from the ballot as running for re-election in the Democratic primary. Brown characterized her disqualification on her campaign Facebook page as having an insufficient number or inadequate signatures necessary for her to file. And the subsequent disqualification ended up causing her to go to an alternative way to run, and that was file as a write-in candidate. Now, after she filed as a write-in candidate, 2 more write-in candidates filed, one being Mr. Earl Jackson, who carries the full support of the Dallas County Republican Party and is regarded as the only candidate who identifies as a Republican on this write-in race, and another candidate, Michelle McKinney, who is a Dallas County area family law attorney. Now, an interesting point on this race, and one of the reasons it's really received a lot of media attention, is the incumbent Judge Mary Brown presided over the highly publicized custody battle in the Jeff Younger custody case, where Father Jeff Younger contended that his son was a boy named James, and that the mother contended he was a daughter named Luna. And what made this case so controversial was that the judge, Mary Brown, ended up awarding full custody to the mother in this instance. According to the Dallas County Republican Party, that custody issue has really brought a significant highlight to this race. And they told me in an interview that their candidate, Earl Jackson, was receiving a lot more attention in this race due to that issue than what other judicial races typically see.
There you go. Well, very interesting, and folks, certainly worth going and reading the full story at thetexan.news. Matthew, thank you so much for your great coverage this week. Let's move on to our tweetery section. Brad, why don't we start with you? What did you see on Twitter this week?
I found absolutely nothing this week, and so I'm going with something totally different. The sports equinox, which is the day of the year that the NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL are all in action. Usually only happens once, maybe twice. That occurred October 20th, a week ago today. So, wait, yes, I think so. Adding up the numbers correctly, yes. And so 7 days ago that occurred. And it's, I don't know, I've always found it interesting. Turn on TV and there's every single sport, even though I don't watch it all, but yeah. So my lack of anything of note in particular led to that.
Well, it's kind of like the Olympics in a way. You can turn on the TV and take your pick of what you want to watch.
That is true.
Okay, there you go. Hayden, what did you see this week?
I saw a tweet from Bloomberg that included a piece that they published discussing that Iowa is possibly going from a swing state to a Republican state and discussed how the congressional races in Iowa are either tilting toward Republicans or trending that way. And if Iowa goes for Trump in 2024, or DeSantis, excuse me, then it would possibly be, I shouldn't presume the nominees, but those are the two names floating around right now. So I'll use those as examples. If Iowa's electoral votes go to the Republican in 2024, then it would possibly solidify its being in Republicans' column because it went for Trump in 16 and 20. It went for Obama in 08 and 12, but it is increasingly becoming more Republican, was the general idea of this Bloomberg piece, which is interesting politically because Iowa has traditionally been the first battleground for presidential candidates and New Hampshire after that. But it could be that New Hampshire takes its seat as the first political battleground if Iowa becomes less relevant in that regard.
Interesting. Very interesting. Rob, what about you?
So the San Antonio Express-News published an article about the Uvalde families and Texas DPS director Steve McGraw. So McGraw had previously claimed that if he believed that DPS was culpable for the Uvalde shooting that occurred in May, then he would resign. And he's now said that he does not believe that the DPS technically was culpable. I believe he said that he thought DPS did seemingly what they could, but the investigation, if I recall correctly, is still ongoing. But as all this came out, U.S. House candidate Tony Gonzalez for District 23 came out and said DPS Director McGraw should resign immediately. So it's a bit of an interesting thing here, seeing this kind of questions about this as we're still coming to, as the investigation's still ongoing and people are still looking for responsibility for where that shooting lies.
Well, there you go. My tweet this week is, I think it was quite funny, and I think multiple people from our company retweeted it, which is pretty great. But and I know exactly why Daniel Friend retweeted it, because this is the most punny thing I've ever seen on Twitter. It was so cringy. But Elon Musk entered the Twitter headquarters. I'm also very confused about how he is now the head of Twitter, like owns Twitter, and how that whole thing happened from start to finish. It's very confusing to me. But regardless, he went into Twitter's headquarters, and this is his tweet: "Entering Twitter HQ. Let that sink in." And the video shows him walking into the headquarters holding a sink. Like just carrying around a sink. And it is so cringy.
I saw that, and I did not understand the why or where the sink came from. Or I looked for backstory on it too.
Imagine being the lackey that had to go pick up a sink
for Elon.
Yeah.
To carry in.
And this tweet got 1 million likes.
1 million.
By the way.
Imagine you're having that conversation at like the Home Depot or the Lowe's. You're like, I just need a sink. They're like, what for? Like, what kind of bathroom? They're like, no, I don't just
give me
a
your
sink.
best sink.
Yeah, just give me a sink. The cheapest one you have.
Oh, man. And honestly, Matt, it was the same for me. I read it like 3 or 4 times and could not understand it for a while. And then I saw Daniel retweet it and I thought, oh my gosh, it must be a pun. That is honestly what I thought. Daniel's in this room looking at me like I'm crazy, but that was interesting.
He should have got like a toilet and come wheeling in on a dolly to send a message to the Twitter employees.
Yeah, I'm telling you, they're already at war. But there were also tweets that came out of like Elon at the coffee bar at the Twitter headquarters, just hanging around talking with employees. It was quite a crowd, of course, because it's Elon Musk. So
I will say this, though. He put out that statement about, there's a lot of information floating around about why he got Twitter or bought Twitter. And, it was this very, very, I think, profound statement, speaking about, the necessity for a digital town square and preserving free speech. And it was very a very heartfelt message, and something that was, I enjoyed reading it. I encourage anybody listening to go check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, folks, fun topic this week, which was chosen by our very own Brad Johnson. Best way to carve a pumpkin. Do you guys carve pumpkins in this office? Do you guys carve pumpkins? Is that something you do every year?
It's not something I do every year, but I was over at a couple people's house a few weeks ago where we did carve pumpkins. So that was the first pumpkin I'd carved in like years.
Okay, that's fun. Oh, Matt is holding up a tiny little pumpkin that you get at the store. Matt, that is an adorable pumpkin. You are muted for the record, so we cannot hear you.
This is the entirety of my holiday decorations. I'm a minimalist.
You're a minimalist. Well, minimalism is very in right now, Matthew. Hayden, what about you?
I do not carve pumpkins, but I saw one that was truly terrifying. It was a pumpkin with a check engine light carved into it.
Oh,
it's very frightening.
It's very triggering.
It is. Yeah,
that's a pretty good
car
idea.
trouble. It's such a pain.
Ugh. Yeah, I'm with you.
It's not terrifying though. I was just being dramatic.
It might be terrifying for some people, including myself. I have like a low pressure sign on my car right now, and I'm like, like low tire pressure.
I had that, and
Ugh.
I had to get my tire replaced.
Yeah,
because they said they couldn't fix it.
But I just replaced all my tires. Like I did exactly what I needed to do. Replaced all my tires, and now I already have that light on.
You know, I had an incredible story actually about car trouble from just yesterday.
Oh,
I've had this rattling noise in my car that happens every time I accelerate the car. And yesterday I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pop the trunk and see what it is. And I just got this car recently, and like the support rod, which is supposed to keep the hood up when you're working on the hood, had been attached to the hood when somebody slammed it shut, meaning that the support rod was like at this weird, awful bent angle and just sitting there attached to the hood when it should not have been. So there's like this loose piece of metal just ringing around in my car as I'm driving it. And that's where the noise was coming from.
Well, it makes sense. Brad, pumpkins?
Yeah, this weekend I'm replacing the ball joints on my truck and putting a new serpentine belt on it. That
sounds like a foreign language to me. Great for you, Matthew. I'm really proud of you. Bradley, what about you? Car trouble, pumpkins, either or.
Anything. Car trouble, I just ignored a check engine light and it's gone away. So no, I'm going to take it to the shop at some point. I've been saying that for a couple weeks. But pumpkins, the reason this popped in my head is my roommates and I are carving pumpkins tonight to decorate the house that a grand total of 4 trick-or-treaters will show up to and steal all my candy. Yes, I'm still bitter about that. And half of them were just teenagers wearing gym shorts.
It drives me crazy.
Irritating. Anyway, so I saw this video on Twitter. Maybe this should have been my Twitter section. It showed better ways to carve pumpkins, and one of them was you cut it from the bottom, not the top, and then you take like an egg beater and you use that to loosen up all of the crap inside the pumpkin and make it easier to scoop out rather than digging at it like a caveman with a rusty spoon they found in the caveman wouldn't have a rusty spoon, but you get my point. It's a pain in the butt to clear all that garbage out of the pumpkin, and this apparently makes it easier. So
there you go. Delightful stuff. Well, that sounds like something I may have to try. I don't carve pumpkins that often, but when I do, I love it. I love the smell. I love getting up in there, my hands dirty. I always make pumpkin seeds.
I was about to say, do you like pumpkin seeds?
Well, I don't even like them that much. It's just the novelty of it. I think they're okay, and I will certainly have some. I like pumpkin seeds without that shell, but when you just take them out of the pumpkin, they have that shell. It does kind of get in your teeth. It's a little annoying.
Yeah,
but
I can't stop eating them. They're good.
Yeah. You put some good seasoning on it.
Yeah.
That's all you need. Daniel, you've not been on the podcast in a long time. Really fast, say hi to listeners and tell us if you have any pumpkin intel to share with us.
You know, I really don't have a lot of pumpkin intel. The most I do with pumpkins is I go to the store and I get the pumpkins that are already processed and put into a can that I can then make pumpkin bread out of. That's
totally worthwhile.
So pumpkin bread all the way. put some chocolate chips in there, and then make the bread, and then put some more chocolate chips in there. It's great.
Very industrious of you.
Yeah.
How excited are you to edit this podcast?
It'll be a blast.
We give you a lot to work with this time, so have fun. Oh, brother. Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today and dealing with the technical difficulties. You all are troopers. And Matthew, thank you particularly for jumping back on. Folks, thank you for listening, and we will catch you next week. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoy our show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want more of our stories, subscribe to The Texan at thetexan.news. Follow us on social media for the latest in Texas politics, and send any questions for our team to our mailbag by DMing us on Twitter or shooting an email to editor@thetexan.news. We are funded entirely by readers and listeners like you, so thank you again for your support. Tune in next week for another episode of our weekly roundup. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Now, that's right, Mackenzie. For a state district, can you hear me? Hello? Am I not there? Can you not hear me? Hello? Marco Polo?